Let's rock that madness. Okay.
Yay!
How's it going?
What's up, Nicole?
Not much, man. How's it hanging?
Man, it's cool. Just trying to rock some madness. You know what I'm saying? Trying to be cool, like you.
Thanks for having me, on this platform. I think it's really nice of you to invite us here. It's nice to see you.
Dude, of course, man. Dude, you've been putting in that good work for a long time, you know. Plus, we've always talked um, I consider people like you and you and myself and Sam doing the same thing but in different ways. You guys are like my rock and roll sisters,
I
and
believe
also
it.
Ogun Prime too. So he's we're all in the same you know thing, but kind of doing our own expression of it. You know.
Uh, Absolutely, I resonate with that. Yeah, we've both been doing that for a long time, and Samantha too, like you said. So
Oh
I appreciate that.
yeah, yeah. You guys are like my rock and roll sisters, man. You know, in arms. Well, mind if I introduce you?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Man, and if I get anything wrong, please correct me. Man, where do I start? I gotta get all my laughs out, man. Okay.
It's okay.
Today we have an amazing force. Not just a person, a force. A force in this whole music thing going on that we're rocking. And also just she's been at the forefront of really, documenting things for and showcasing and shining light on things when it comes to Black people in the diaspora from the past to the present to the future. Nicole Colley, aka NICOLE NOIR, is a musician, musicologist, Afrofuturist, and a promoter, and just an artist, period, that is just doing a lot of great things. She was with Brew, Black Writer, Black Rockers United, and she also runs her own thing. She started, I think it was last year, called Rock the Diaspora. She also has a showcase thing that she does called Mid Atlantic International Punk, Metal, and Rock Shows, which she promotes shows and different artists.
Thank
And
you.
if I missed anything, let me know.
Oh
You
no,
know.
that's
Oh, I forgot.
amazing. Thank you.
You She also highlights a lot of Black labels, Black run rock
Oh,
labels, which is
that too.
something that I don't see cats doing. But yeah, let me know like if I missed
Oh,
anything.
I totally forgot about that. Yeah, because it's just been a minute since I made that list. I actually need to add more labels to it. Because I didn't see, like you said, people really talking about that since the pandemic is like Black-owned labels, and specifically for rock, I didn't really see that at all.
Yeah,
So I decided to make my own list. Yeah.
that's awesome. Did I forget anything? I feel like you do so much, and like you're in so many different areas. I know you're a model. I think you're a gamer, right? I
Mhm.
know you're into anime and stuff. And
Yes, absolutely that too. Yeah, I'm also part of like I guess the gaming like geek community. Like very heavy into that since I was younger. So yeah.
does the sword fighting, does that come from that too, as well? Because I know cats are into that.
Partially, I think, yeah. I think from watching, like Yu Yu Hakusho and like Fist of the North Star when I was a kid, because I was really inspired by like Eastern philosophy, and like, martial arts. But I think it's also like just for me, I think it makes sense when I found out I was Hausa, like Hausa being like a northern central African like identity is like they're very much sword fighters, right? And they usually when they wield weapons, it's like a blade or some form of like iron sword. So
It's
it's
funny that I
yeah.
think we had this conversation. I found out on my dad's side via my cousin and also some DNA, that I have some of that background too. But it
Mm-hmm.
was like the Fulani Hausa, when they combined. So some of my lineage comes from that, like as far as the African part,
Wow,
So
well,
that's
that's awesome.
interesting.
That's great, Orlando. That's so cool. Right
Yeah,
on.
it's a trip. I think we're talking about like the Fulani and like one of those Fulani tribes, which was the less warmongering one, in
Yeah,
my opinion. There's a lot of them from like east to west and even North Africa. A lot of them were Moors, like we're called Moors or whatnot.
yeah,
But
yeah.
those Niger, like what do they call them, the Wadobe tribe, like I think we were talking about like because their makeup and
Yeah,
stuff and like just
yes, yes, we were talking about the makeup. Absolutely,
yeah.
Orlando, yeah.
Man, so with that, I have to ask this. We talk about music a lot, both of our platforms. I have to ask you this. What was your earliest introduction to music first? And I'm trying not to ask my three-part questions because I'll be throwing in like three questions in one. So I'm trying not to do that.
like feel free to ask like whatever you're curious about. Do you like have any particular questions about like the music or?
Well, I was just wondering what was your earliest encounter with music and how did you get into music? Also, the second of my three-part questions, how did you get into rock and roll? Like what was your earliest encounter with that?
Oh, thank you for asking. I it's hard to really recall. I think the first musical experience I probably had was like just like making drum sounds, probably like myself. Like I just liked how percussion felt, but I also liked the sound of it. But I specifically remember like two artists when I was a kid that I heard when I was like around 2 or 3 was like Tribe Called Quest, and I was just like really drawn to that sound. I think it was a War tour, with Muhammad My Man going each and every, yeah, it was that. But it was also, now that I think about it, Lenny Kravitz. So like those two artists were really big when I was like very young, and I think because my parents really had an affinity for rock and they listened to Lenny Kravitz, the Police, like Genesis. Um, and like Van Halen, a lot of that when I was younger. I think I just kind of ran with that, and or just like became part of what I listened to in the background, and then I just started developing my own taste in music. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mm.
What got you into the more gothic, alternative, and punk type stuff? Like when was that? When was or even metal? Like when was that a thing?
Um, I think that was probably around the time that I started getting into anime, and then like I think some of the animes that I was particularly drawn to had like heavier soundtracks, and like still to this day like a lot of anime like has like metal or like speed thrash as like some of the fight scenes or background. And I just remember thinking that was a really cool like collaboration between like animation and like heavy music, but then also just goth in general, metal in general. I really like that subculture, so I started to explore it, and it seemed like it was definitely something that was parallel to like the African American experience was like goth and metal. So I just kind of became a goth slash metalhead. Yeah,
That's awesome.
thank
Yeah,
you.
as a person that grew up in the mostly the 80s and early 90s. I mean, I was born in the 70s. I'm like 50 years old, but I remember the first time like I even seen any goth kids, and a lot of us punks and goths like kind of like hung out. And this was even before I was like a punk rocker or whatever. But it's funny because like, back then we called it, LA is known for our death rock,
Yeah,
like bands like 45 Grave and stuff,
totally.
and Eva Super Heroine, bands like Christian Death and all that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, that too.
so that was the first time I ever heard of like gothic music or just or even death rock was seeing people, and I'm like, wow, these guys are not punk rockers. And so a few years later, when I really started embracing that whole punk thing, I I was into that stuff. I was always like a punk rocker, quote unquote. But to me, it was all like a part of the same thing, just different expressions of it. And I guess, of course, goth became its own thing, just like hardcore did. Um, but like it was so weird around that time. People, yeah, I know you know this. Like we weren't, we were kind of scary to people. Like
Yeah,
people would throw
yeah,
food at us, and like, I mean, I look normal now to some degree, but back then, especially being a black kid, having a shaved head and bangs and stuff and spiked hair and stuff and occasional makeup or shaved eyebrows
yeah.
with boots and safety pins everywhere, that wasn't cool with a lot of people. And I'm just curious, like what you went through with that, like just on both sides of that.
Um, I think I've always just like kind of been like scary to people, like just because like I have a certain intensity to my character, and I honestly like I don't really care for the most part what people think as long as I'm telling the truth. I think that's already kind of a metal way of approaching things, and like a goth way of approaching things. It's like the truth is what it is. Like you can feel how you feel about it. But it's also, I think, for me, like most of our societies are kind of conformist, so these are very non-conformist, genres of music, and like just the automatic choice to be a metalhead and listen to that music, does make people feel uncomfortable. So in the 80s and in the 70s, I definitely think it was even scarier because it was coming right out of the counterculture, and no one really knew where culture was going to go from that point. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a trip even talking into, like Rodcore. I think he even mentioned it on the interview because he's a bit older than I am, even though that brother looks young, man. Really cool cat.
Yeah.
But he, hearing the older punks and what they went through versus like even what I went through, it's just like, man, like it's a trip.
I feel
And then
that.
the other kids and all that.
Yeah.
And within that, I have to ask, like, oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Continue. Yeah.
The musician, what was the first instrument that and how many instruments do you play? What was the first instrument that you approached, and like, was it before you got into like the goth and metal thing and punk thing, or was it simultaneously?
My dad's a jazz percussionist. He used to play session musician type stuff, like for different people in St. Louis and in the Midwest. So I was really into percussion, but I think because he used to play the violin, I just kind of like gravitated towards strings instruments, but I actually liked it more than he did. It's just violin's kind of hard to maintain, right? So I didn't stick with it. It was more like mallet percussion type, like marching band percussion that I still am into, and drum set as well. So mainly
Wow.
drumming. I just don't have any of that equipment anymore of my own. And then I can produce beats. That's mainly the thing that I've delved into, is making synthetic, like artificial beats. Yeah.
With your style, like the songs that I've heard, do you just have one project, or is a bunch of different projects under there? I've heard a few things that you've done. Some of it's more on the goth side, and then some of it is on the heavier rock, grunge, and even metal type stuff. Like, what? How could I say this? What? Who are your influences? Now, some of the things that I saw on your page that really got me, and it was like, wow. And I know you're into all kinds of music. Rosetta Tharpe being one, Polystyrene, Suzi Quatro. If you've never heard Suzi Quatro's band Cradle, have you heard that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sick.
Really great band, dude.
They are
Really great band.
sick. They're like the female Sabbath, bro. Like they're bad.
I
They're
totally
sick.
agree.
Joan Jett, Betty Davis, Marsha Hunt. I love Marsha Hunt.
Oh, Marshall
Love
Hunt's
Betty
a
too.
great artist. Yes.
Yeah. Uh-oh, somebody.
What'd you say?
Oops. That's sorry.
That's okay.
Coming in for me. Um,
Yeah.
and Alexis Brown, I don't know too much about her. I've heard her name, but I don't know too much. But it's just when you started playing music, like were those kind of like people that were of interest, or were there later on, or you just kind of started playing? How can I say this? Started playing rock and roll like in spite of any of them, and they were just kind of people along the way. They're like, hey, what's up? Like just ideally.
I think for me, it was mainly just being like, well, maybe like this isn't so out of the norm. Though, like, I kind of do stuff anyway, like,
Yeah.
but it was kind of like less anxiety inducing to know that I'd already seen like these black women do rock before. I was just kind of, I guess, curious to see how much no one really talked about their influence in music. But I still was gonna like make my own like rock and stuff regardless. I started getting more serious into music after like choir and like elementary school. Like by high school, I was like, I kind of want to do marching band at the very least to pursue it on a semi-serious level. I just didn't do anything after that in terms of like playing with people ensemble wise, but that was fun.
Wow.
In terms of projects, everything kind of basically is under one umbrella, like DJ Kama, but that can be like dark wave or like metal or include more people than just myself. Yeah.
Who would you say? I mean, I don't know if these ladies are just are total influences, but who would you say if these are not? What was one influence that you had in order to like basic like just musical influences? I don't know if I just listed all of
Oh,
them
there's
or
a lot
just
of them, yeah. But Alexis Brown, like from Straight Line Stitch, I didn't find out about her until like a minute later. I found out about like Fallon Bowman before, like through Kitty and stuff, and like Marsha Hunt and stuff like that. But I guess in terms of like, I think I'd probably more aesthetically and like just like for the fact that they did it, that was more inspiring to me. Sound wise, I think my biggest influences would probably be the Mars Volta, like that's a big one.
my friend
Um,
Ike was in that
cool.
band. I don't know if I told you.
Oh, that's
Ike
so cool,
Owens
man.
was the keyboardist. That's
That,
my homeboy, man.
that's
Like
sick.
we're from the same city, and he played in my band Create like once, and I've jammed with him. Like I miss that brother. He was a good dude, man. You would love that guy if you met him, dude. He would be like totally
Oh,
embracing you, man. He's a good dude. Rest in peace to Ike Owens, man. I'm sorry I had to. You mentioned Mars
yeah.
Volta. And I'm like,
Yeah, no,
that's the guy
that's
that
definitely on
came to
point.
mind.
That's real. Like I really love that band, dude. Like they're a really big influence. And then like TV on the radio, and then what else? Who else? Uh, a lot of Joy Division, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So like a lot of Black Goth, and then just like in general like goth and like some metal too was like a big
That's
one
awesome.
when I was growing up. Yeah, but then like my parents and like progressive rock and like Van Halen and Rush, that kind of stuff. I was like really intrigued by.
I have to ask this, especially if your parents are in the progressive rock, since you mentioned Genesis. Peter Gabriel Genesis or after Peter Gabriel Genesis?
I don't know. I don't know because like Peter Gabriel was a really like dope musician. Like it was definitely really cool. Like Genesis was like beast when he was like in it, but then like I don't know. It was just like it was kind of like the epilogue to like they knew the band was ending basically like after he
Yeah.
left. Yeah, yeah, and it's like
Peter was a
weird
huge
to like hear that
influence
they
on
knew
me.
that it was ending.
Oh yeah, I totally get that, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, Peter, I love that era a lot.
it was a
Like
good
even on
era,
some of my
dude. Like
live
that was a
shows,
really cool time.
oh
That
yeah,
was such a cool time. Yeah.
man. So what got you in the promoting and like what started you promoting shows? Because that's a lot of information to have. Like were you doing like that like every week? I caught it a few times or every day. It seems like that's a lot of info, dude. Like what made you start doing that?
I used to do that when I was like around 14 or 15, like just like for like on a smaller scale, it was like shows that I thought people should know about, in the DC area specifically, but then I fell off for a minute. And then I started to get more back into promotion after college because I had more time for the job specifically that I do now. Because it's split between a nonprofit and a metal magazine. I was in charge of doing like shows in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. But after a minute, I got bored with just doing that, so I decided to do the East Coast. And then I did that for a year, and then I just like did the whole country. And now I just like got bored and did the entire world,
That
basically.
was phenomenal, though. I'm like, for me, I feel like, how is she doing all this like by
It took
herself?
like
You know?
you're hearing it like in like in succession. So like it took a year to like kind of understand the United States in terms of promotion. This is also like at the same time like venues are closing down. So like for me, I was like, okay, like it would be nice that people like knew about these venues and stuff and these shows before they closed because like still to this day like a lot of like really legendary spots like across the country and the world are closing down. Like
So
CBGBs, like that was that stuff like that is still happening. God, I know there's a spot Pyramid nightclub right in like NYC that shut down that Militia Vox was talking about. That's
man,
been open for like 25 years and stuff. So that's also another reason I wanted to talk about just metal and rock, because a lot of these venues are making it possible.
you guys still have the Black Cat where you live? My band Javelina played there once.
Oh, nice. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
Man, it's so
I
rad, man.
think
Like
it's awesome it's still here. Honestly, yeah, I agree.
so I'm looking like an old man at this point with these glasses.
It's okay.
um, I have to ask because I know, like, I'm. Let's talk about. There's a few things that I want to talk about, and I'm
I
sorry
got
if
you,
I'm
man. I
just
got you.
Um, first of all, did you do any of the stuff that you did with Black Rockers United and Rock the Diaspora before you were even doing anything like that?
Yeah.
I'm just curious. And are you like an anthropologist or musicologist by just like college or just on your own or both?
I think
That
I
sounds like a
started doing
weird
that
thing.
when I was a kid. I think like one of my like my dad's like work colleagues called me like a little griot when I was like 8,
Yep.
but I didn't know what it meant. You know, at the time, I thought he was like making fun of me. He's like, no, a griot is someone that collects stories and tells them like in an
Yep.
artistic way. I don't know. I was really like kind of like intrigued by that idea, and I understood folklore and like this African identity was like usually something people talked about. Um, so I just wanted to like find a formal way to talk about it. But in a way people would like be interested in and not bored, because a lot of it is very intensive, like information heavy stuff. So when I did that for my own like purposes, I think Black Rockers United was like, would you be interested in like doing that for us and then like making a website from that idea? Because I don't think they ever really had like an official direction or like landing page, like Black Rockers United was just kind of this ambiguous thing. So that's kind of the format for Rock the Diaspora as well, is like making a timeline of like blues, rock, metal, punk for people to like be immersed in and to understand.
When you were at Brew, like I recognize that with a lot of the stuff that you put out. And I'm like, wow, she's like, because they had their things that they were doing that seemed that was just focused on certain bands and stuff. But yours, like, like your input just seemed like it was like, okay, there's those bands and all that, but here's something that's a little bit before that that led to those bands or the artist in certain bands. It's
Yeah.
very, very historical, very ancestral, and just that's what really, I think we were friends before I even like started looking into what Brew was. So I'm like, man, she's standing out with that, like, and I'm not shading on them, but it's just I recognize the difference, like um so with that, when I for a while I didn't hear from you, and then Rock the Diaspora, I started seeing it, and it showed up, and I'm like, what's the? And I'm like, whoa, this is odd. And then I saw you, like, there she
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
So
yeah. It had been what, a good like half a year between the time that I stopped officially being like public with the post for Brew and then just deciding to do this, because this was already like just a more relevant version of that. Like it is nice to spotlight bands. We still do that on RTD all the time. Like that stuff is important. It's just like it didn't go anywhere. You know what I mean? Like spotlighting the bands just seemed to be like very much that, and then moving on. I was like, well, the reason it's not really like gaining momentum or really hitting people in a proper place is because like we're not connecting it to any historical context. Like people don't care about this stuff, you know?
yeah, that's the thing. Like, and I have to ask, like, if you don't mind me asking, did you just feel like you just needed to go on your own, and you had more that you felt like you could offer like by yourself? You're very independent. I can see with a lot of the things that you're doing, and that's awesome. Like, did you like your reasons for leaving Brew? Did you just feel like, hey, I just need more space, with that in that regard?
It was largely that.
And
It was largely that, my friend. But I'll be real with you. It was the black male ego, and I'll just be honest with the specific person that founded Brew. Um, there's a team of us. It's not just me. It's just I'm in charge of media. So is Kim Gill being great, and then Ali's in charge of a lot of the spotlights and just how things look aesthetically and logistically flow. So like, here we are trying to make the Brew thing happen. The issue was it became like an issue of jealousy, right? Like if these posts get more traction or if I get more traction because I'm doing interviews, then it would be like the founder getting mad at me and having like temper tantrums because, I'm getting more attention than they are. The thing is, like Nate never really was someone that people knew about, right? You didn't know who Nate was. Right.
I didn't. I'm
None of my
sorry.
crew knew who Nate was, so like it wasn't up to me to make him like a known figure. That was his responsibility. So that's mainly why I left. I was like, it's not really about the popularity. Like I'm not asking to be popular. I'm doing this because I think artists deserve like a spotlight. So it's probably just going to be easier for me to do that without hearing people, push back if I just do this like RTD. And that's the team from Brew. Like Ali and Kim basically just decided to make this collective with me, and continue to do what we did.
I'll just say this as a male. I'm sorry because I don't want anybody to feel a certain way, and no one should. When it especially comes to black folks, in our circle too. When it comes to rock and roll, we can't do that. And I never want to come off like that. I
No, that's
think
fine.
because it's just, how could I say it? I understand cats want to be like get their props and all that, but cats just have to work together, like because there's not too many of us and so many things people are trying to gatekeep things that we've created, and that's
Yeah,
not cool.
yeah.
That's my freaking thing that I'm
Mm-hmm.
really pissed off about right now. And I have been. Like you, I've been doing this pretty much, like I've been looking into this stuff since I was a kid, and my parents cultivated me and everything. But I just always, ever since I was a teenager, studying, always took note of every person that was in rock and roll that was black in all that
Yeah.
regard. And especially when people were telling me, "Oh, that's not our music," and my dad didn't. My dad would always give me different people and mention people because he was into rock and roll too. My mom too. I mean, we had everything from like Chaka Khan to Mother's Finest to Cream,
Oh, that's
and a
amazing.
bunch of
That's
different
so
stuff.
cool.
So
That's
I
so
just
cool.
feel like,
Nice.
no, it's a trip. I mean, I really resonate with a lot of the stuff that you're saying in that regard. And as a dude, I'm sorry. I have
Thank
to apologize because I don't want, I mean, and I know I'm not him, but I just feel like I don't want you to think that all of us, do that. And as a dude, I just feel like I'm taking responsibility if it's just, that overall thing, and hopefully things will pan out and just, how could I say this, heal on whatever end it is and reconcile it, and yeah, with that I have to also ask, what would you say the difference in your platform, Rock the Diaspora, versus what you did in Brew? Would you say it's a you did actually say that it was a continuation of that, but how is it different in that regard? What would you say? And whether it's personal or not, and if it's too personal
No,
and you
it's
don't feel
okay.
uncomfortable,
It's
well,
okay, but it is something that people have noticed, so it is something I might as well be honest about. Just briefly, I have unfortunately been taken advantage of. We'll say that, right? That's before the brew thing. For me, it was like the dynamic of kind of like I can't really say no to you type vibes, like kind of a Harvey Weinstein dynamic of like there will be social repercussions if I reject you because you have power over me. I'm like, naturally, if you're founder of Brew, like I'm not gonna feel comfortable, and that's essentially what happened. It's not like it was like a face to face thing. It was just like a vibe of creepiness, and I was like, well, I feel like I'm being retaliated against by like like essentially saying I'm not really into it, I'm not really feeling it. So when I made Rock the Diaspora, it was very much like of a mindset of like I would like women to feel safe and like not like they're just there, and then like guys are gonna be weird because that has been rock up until this point and still is like rock up until this point. So it's been cultivating a safe space for like people that are alternative and definitely women are like LGBTQ, and that's we've been getting feedback on that is like this seems like a more safe space, like people are looking out for us more, so like that's good, and that was what it was for, that was the goal.
and with that, I think I would love to read some quotes that I've read that I saw on your site that kind of segue into what you're saying,
Thanks, man.
and we can talk about those things. Um, First of all, what is, and I know this is a song that you made. What is a primeval revolution? I know that's a
Oh,
song,
ooh, private
but
revolution. That's really just like what we do at RTD all the time is like just talking about like ancient um modes of thinking, like just identity, like not necessarily old ways, but like just traditional ways of thinking, while also thinking about how that's relevant for us now. Yeah. And the revolution part being largely because this is how a lot of uprisings were won before in the past. Yeah.
Another thing that I think is very interesting that I mean, you have a lot of cool quotes. It says it's not only the music, ancestral personal power and social justice are tools to break the oppressors. Oh my, back. What do you mean by that? I think I know what you mean by that, but I want to hear what you mean by it. I don't want to just assume.
Oh, thanks, Holmes. I think the large, like the missing key, and like everyone that's been a revolutionary in the diaspora has talked about it at some point, especially if you're American, is like the historical context to self-empowerment. You can be self-empowered as a Black person without any link to your African heritage. Like that's something that you can always like find, you know. But I think it was kind of an extra layer of strengthening armor, you know, like to know that we came from something and people who were successful, people who were knowledgeable, people who were musical as well, but also knew how to coordinate resistance. I think Malcolm X was definitely very influential in terms of putting into the mainstream consciousness that resistance is something that you can consistently live, and that there's other people who will help you, you know, same with the Black Panthers. I don't know if people had ever really seen or thought before that Black people could align and engage in such a sophisticated way politically, you know, and that's definitely something that I think that quote is like leaning from, is like, okay, you know, like we obviously have ancestral stakes in terms of like reversing the damage from racism, but we also have tools, you know, that we have acquired along the way.
It's funny you mentioned that. I just saw, shouts to Ashley Sasso, a YouTuber that I follow, and she did a really interesting video on Zora Neale Hurston. I'm sure you know who she is.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it seems like that woman was very much misunderstood. She was all about Black empowerment before it was like, before even Stokely Carmichael even said anything, or Kwame Ture. I don't want to call him the name that he rejected. And I love that guy, by the way. That's it. And I feel like she wanted people to know the exact same thing that you're saying right now. And she kind of got dogged on it because she kind of criticized even certain Black folks that that basically kind of just was clawing up to the status quo of what white society, you know, was giving out. And she's like, no, don't even worry about that. Empower yourself here. I don't want to compare her to Booker T. Washington, but I think she kind of was deemed as that. And then, I mean, that's a whole nother story. People, in some ways, some people would say that people have misunderstood Booker T. Washington, but that's another conversation. Zora Neale Hurston is her own girl, her own woman. Sorry about that.
No, I got you. Yeah.
And I think she was saying that empowerment, like she was saying, you're great by yourself without society. You have your own autonomy. That was the whole thing that I get from her. And I was really cool to hear that video, to see that video. She really nailed it. And unfortunately, she was misunderstood in her generation when it came to that. She thought people were saying that people thought people thought that she was basically, you know, being a hater, but she wasn't. She loved Black people enough to say, hey, you don't need anybody but yourselves. You know, she was a person that didn't really believe in integration in that regard. And I understand that, even though like I have my own opinions. I always say I believe in autonomy. That means I can go anywhere I want, you know. But it kind of reminded me of what you said, you know.
Yeah. I really resonate with that. Yeah, I'm feeling that.
Another thing that I dig, I mean, you have a lot of quotes, as I said, but this one came to mind too. Artists and community healers have to ascend above the fray of, for our planetary future.
Yeah.
So in a sense, with futurism, we're gonna. I like this subject a lot. people think of science fiction, and I know that both of us are like, we're comic book nerds, or you're into anime and science, sci-fi. I like a lot of that stuff too. My dad was also into that. But when people think of Afrofuturism, they of course are going to have that guys, and people like Sun Ra was known for kind of having that guys already. But there's a consciousness when it comes to Afrofuturism and just Black, futurism as a whole. We always had a conscious element to it, to where it's not fictional in a long way.
Yeah.
We had to, because we had to look to a brighter future.
Yeah.
And I think Sun Ra, if you watch the movie Space is a Place,
Yeah.
you probably have seen it. He was echoing that a lot. Same with Parliament Funkadelic, George Clinton.
Yeah.
They kind of took notes from that. Ramel Z as well. There's a lot of people that were on that. I'm curious. See, I'm so sorry. I always in my long-windedness.
This is great. This is great.
With that, would you say with that quote, it kind of resonated the same way, or was just future in general? Did you mean to like even put it in an Afrofuturistic context? One could take it either way, or did you just mean in general? It's definitely general, but I could see it even in that context, which is still general, really.
I think that was okay. So it's kind of interesting. Like you met me basically through the extension of the Metal magazine, because they wanted me to essentially make this persona, Nicole Colley. Nicole Colley is an Afrofuturist. Nicole Colley is a metalhead. And Nicole Colley is basically like outside of the political system. Like that's the main like part of my persona. Because we were predicting that, within the next 10 years, and like it seems to be coming to fruition, that the country was going to like start to come apart at the seams, right? In which case you would probably want to like at least have someone like myself to be like, like the system was already failing. There's other alternatives to that, Around the time that 2016 happened, and Trump got elected, was when I started making pages like that, and thinking ahead, because I knew that that was going to be the only way like out of the situation. By the time that I realized it was Afrofuturist, I'd already kind of been leaning into that and like talking to more people like in that political ideology, and just kind of like thinking about like, okay, like if worst comes to worst, like do people understand what survival is? Do people understand like what survival looks like in the 21st century? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. Like it's funny. Like I'm drawing parallels, of course, with Sun Ra saying the same thing. Like even I'm not saying that you knew about him. What you're saying is very independent, but it still has the same thing. And even with Ramel Z with his whole Gothic futurism thing, if you're familiar with him, he's something else. Yeah, Ramel Z. I was just talking about him.
So cool.
Michael Holman, who I interviewed, I know he knew him too.
Really?
Oh yeah, those guys all came up, like Jean-Michel Basquiat, him, and they're all homies, like on New York underground scene, Of course, Ramel was always a rapper, but he was also a graffiti artist, and then he decided to just do what Daft Punk did before Daft Punk did it, become a masked superhero. And it's always another different consciousness when it comes to, especially when we're talking about our thing. It's not just aliens for the sake of aliens. I'm not saying that, mainstream society doesn't have a level of consciousness, but for us, it's always been on that. It's always been on that. Like, even when it comes to like experimental stuff, there's always that kind of consciousness, no matter what. Like there's always something.
No, yeah.
We had no choice.
And like for me, like it was also because like Flying Lotus, I remember like being into Flying Lotus like since like 2010, and we had to do some sort of audio project. That's right, we had to do like an audio visual project for college before I graduated, and we were like hanging out at the Recording Academy because like they have their headquarters downtown, so we're using their studio to like make stuff. And I remember liking Fly Low a lot, and my professor being like, go ahead and make a project with Flying Lotus. So he took a sample from Madlib, and Madlib took basically made the quote from Sun Ra, "Today is the shadow of tomorrow. Today is the present future of yesterday, like space is the place." And I made that basically the underlying sounds for the video, you know, and the visuals were of Black people from different tribes, right?
Wow.
Today is the shadow of tomorrow. Today is the present future of yesterday. And then at the end, it was like Black Americans like standing next to each other. Yeah. So ever since then, I was like, okay, Afrofuturism can be something like Flying Lotus, you know, where they're talking about the different eras of Blackness and like the different expressions of that. I definitely think that Flying Lotus intentionally chose Sun Ra because of that idea, because he is one of the more famous figures in that ideology.
Yeah, a lot of people will say that he's the father of it. I mean,
Yeah.
Sun Ra's a trip because not only musically, which you can't really pigeonhole him. I mean, he was a part of that whole. Of course, he played with like Stuff Smith and like a lot of other different, I guess what people call traditional jazz artists. And you know, he was I mean, Ellington was kind of like doing what people would consider Ravel, doing like, you know, exotic type pieces. But Sun Ra almost like took notes and just took that to not just different places, but outer space. You know, not only that, visually, this guy was the first to actually do light shows at a show.
That
You know,
part,
like a lot of people don't
that
know that.
part.
You know, like he was something else. He was one of the earlier Moog synthesizer producers, and I think he even made his own synthesizers, or some kind of electric piano, either before or during that time. I forget. I'd read it a long time ago, but yeah, he was the trip, man, and just his whole philosophy was something else. You know,
I love his phone.
Yeah, man. With that, it's interesting. Looking at your work, it's like you're tackling the past, but you're in the present and still talking about things of that, but also the future. It's amazing how like they all tie in, right?
Yeah. I think that's the exciting part of Afrofuturism for people that have just discovered it for the first time. Is like the past is gone. You know what I mean? Like there's only so much you can really engage in it, but the remnants are still there. You know, like you were living in the aftermath of the past, and that's what I love about Sun Ra and how his mind worked, because like he's right. Like today is the shadow of tomorrow, right? Like what happens now affects in the future, but we're also living in, you know, the ghost of the past, you know. And America, especially James Baldwin talked about that. Like America is still coming to grips with the ghost of its past, right? And Afrofuturism is already doing that. Yeah.
Man, yeah, that's profound. I have to ask this, since and I have yeah, we've talked about this, but just for the record, you know, this going on. What's up, Kyle? Ooh, we got
Oh,
Kyle. Kyle is the
Kyle
homie,
Zero?
dude.
Nice.
Yeah, are you still
Oh
here,
my gosh, I
dude?
miss them. How are they doing? I
That,
like their
that
Black Blog
brother's awesome.
spotlights and everything. That's been really nice to see.
Yeah,
That's been
that's been really cool. He just talked about my friend's old band PMS, and I
Oh
miss
really?
Suzanne. Oh, that broke my heart when I found out that she passed,
Oh,
man.
that's a
That
shame.
I used to work with her. Well, I worked
Really?
security at the place that she worked at, and we would always talk about brothers and sisters rocking, you know. And she's the one that really kind of hit me to Rosetta Tharpe. I didn't know about her before that,
Wow.
to be honest.
To be honest, it's usually Black women that introduce people to like Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Yeah.
Oh yeah, man. You know, and she was like, "Yeah, man, you check her out." And I mean, she was a guitarist herself. She was in the band Taste of Honey. She played guitar for them for a
Nice.
bit.
Oh, Taste of Honey. Oh wow, that was a great band.
Yeah.
Great band.
She went by Minnie. She was short, little light skinned
Oh,
chick.
that's great.
She was really cool, man. She was just like, and she had her own group, Suzanne Thomas.
Oh yeah.
She and then I didn't hear from her for a while, and then I found out through a mutual friend that she had passed. I was like, oh, that, because I wanted to get a hold of her just to see, you know, if I could even interview her at one point, or just to see how she was doing. I had no idea, man, but she was really cool, man, really cool. So when I saw Kyle did the PMS tribute, I'm like, that's the homegirl, man. She's awesome, you know, Suzanne Thomas, and she's in the Smithsonian too.
Oh, that's
She,
right.
you
That's
know,
right.
she told
Yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, man. I have to ask this too, in regards to what we're saying. What do you say when people, and I've heard this, I have my own answer, you know this already. What do you say when people will say that there's no black roots in rock and roll, or the black roots of rock and roll are gone? They always regulate our roots to the 50s, or the 40s, which of course it began in. I would even say as far back as Memphis Minnie. Of course, that was like 1929. But what do you say when people say, "Oh, the black roots are of rock and roll are gone," or like what Scott Ian said in regards to metal, basically, starting with Judas Priest instead of Black Sabbath. I have my own theories about this, not theories, but facts about this. But I want to hear yours because I know that you not only touch about things, of course, with us foundational Black Americans, but also things in Africa, which, we've talked about that also mirror things that a lot of Black Americans conjugated in our own way when it came to inventing rock and roll. I'm curious, like, what you would say to a person that says that.
I would play them this. Just so they understand, like, oh, like black people do jam, you know what I mean? Like they do make polyrhythmic music. And that the kora, like you're hearing here in like Mali and like Senegal, the guitar harp basically was a massive influence for like modern and classical music. The harpsichord was like more popular than the piano for a time in American music. So like anything that sounded like the harpsichord was huge, especially in the United States. Most of us couldn't bring stuff like koras, right? But we can bring things like banjos, which we still call it that, right? If there's any sort of flute instrument in the United States, the chances are either Native Americans or African American hands were responsible for that. And since a lot of our music, Negro spirituals, was a literal like entertainment soundtrack for a lot of the plantations. Plantations would specifically have specific slaves, to play the music and to like keep the sound going for their events. That is the prototypical foundation for rock. That's the bedrock for the sound. The issue is that people are thinking about it in the same way as they think about Southern food, right? Southern cuisine is a really white, elevated way of saying soul food, right? It's already been removed at this point from the context, so it's easier to like denote it as somebody else. The problem is, where does Southern cuisine initially come from? Where does Southern cuisine come from, Orlando? It didn't just come out of nowhere. Who
No,
made
it
it?
didn't. It came from us.
Remember that scene
Keep
in
it.
Forrest Gump when they're talking about Bubba's mom, and then like how long she had been like, you go back in her family, like she'd been cooking in the kitchen basically for white people since she arrived here, right? What if we took rock and made it the same way? Right? Like rock is essentially the same thing. Like if you go
It
back
is.
generations of black people, probably about 6 or 7, you would realize there was generations of like black musicians or some form adjacent to um, that had instruments, but were not being seen as responsible for the sound. Right? They were just seen as background noise. And that context is really hard for people to get rid of because they're still looking at it as black people are still just the entertainment, right? Black people were still just the plantation band, right? Not the actual owners of these instruments, or like knowledgeable in music. Yeah.
It's interesting. I was laughing at this one guy. It was some post online, and it just shows how like really ridiculously ignorant that some people are. He's all, yeah, man. It was this all lives matter type ideology where he's like, yeah, hold on, I'm right.
No, take your time. Take your
Um,
time.
this all lives matter thing where it's just like, yeah, man, the black people bought the percussion and then the white people bought the strings, and I had to break it down to him like that. I'm like, we had strings in Africa even before that, and we had to make use of just different rhythms that we were doing, and we conjugated our own selves. You can't get rid of that.
Yeah, no,
And
that's
it's just like, dude,
absolutely facts. Like anything European that was influenced or that was like, involved with African music, African American music, Negro spirituals, would only be so far as borrowing those instruments. But even then, we already had fiddles and lutes, like in Africa. Like those things already existed in a different form. But like I said, like when you come to the United States, then it's a matter of modifying things to best fit in with what the masters wanted, and the masters wanted very specific classical sound. Um, so the kora, which has 20 strings, would end up only having 6 and 5. That's why we have like 5 like string guitars and stuff like that now. Basses, which had 3, would end up having 4, right? And then drums would end up being smaller so that you can carry them around. But like all of these were things that we already had.
Funny thing about the drum set, that was a black man that
Absolutely.
invented that. People don't know
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
And shouts to True Savior and Dewan B. They've been really talking about stuff like that, and as well. I follow those guys as well.
Oh,
They're really,
oh my gosh!
really,
Thank you so much for yes. I love that. I love that they're talking about that.
yeah, it's a trip, man. And even I told recently because I, I have to break it down to someone and just my theory of people talking about metal. I'm like, first of all, you guys are always talking about classical is the reason that metal is, but you would not have metal without, our Black American experience and our Black American input. Classical is set. I know this because I've been in orchestras and played classical music, and I've composed classical music myself. It's set. Even when these guys, like some of my favorite composers, Stravinsky or any of these guys, have experimented, there's no room for improv unless you're on some way out fringe. Everything is written down. With us, there's a spontaneity, and and it's a certain way that it conjugates itself that has not only lasted through traditional rock music, it's gone through metal, yes, even punk. I hate when people say that, oh yeah, the Ramones just made punk white. No, they were doing the same thing that Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley were doing.
And by
Not
that
only
point,
that,
like punk, like those aren't even like if you're gonna talk about white punk, that's like still too late in like punk at that point. Like it would be like more like the Damned. That would be like some of like the first white punks. You know what I mean?
I
Or
wouldn't
like
even
to be
say
honest,
that,
even
dude.
like some of the like the Rude Boys and like the ska like community like in England, like they would probably be the first like white punks if you were to really think about it.
I was
But it wouldn't be the
say this though, even with the Damned, you could still hear what we've done. Like all
I
those
said white
groups,
punks though.
like still have the roots. I mean,
Well, I
you
said
could.
white punks for a reason.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was that?
I said white punks for a reason. I didn't say punks in general. I said if you're going to talk about the first white punks, it would probably be the Damned.
Yeah, yeah. I was just saying, like, just I guess in sound, people will always try to divorce it from like the roots of rock. You
What?
can't because it still
No.
has the
I'm saying.
same, the same backbone, the same kind of vibe that was not in classical or any other European folk music like
I
that.
agree. I totally
It's just
agree.
kind of, like, yeah, it's just like people will talk about, well, like Judas Priest was like the first heavy metal band, and because they want to try to erase Sabbath because of the quote
Because of the
unquote blues
blues.
influence. But
Yeah.
even Rob Halford said that those blues influence still influenced us. Like what are you
I
talking about?
agree. It
Um,
is very interesting. It's very strange.
yeah,
What do you
it's a
think about
trip,
that?
man. What do I think about it?
Yeah.
I think that it never left. The thing is, there's a lot of things within rock and roll that still echoes. I don't care if you're playing death metal or not. It still echoes a lot of things that we started in that regard. Spontaneity and improv is one thing that Rob Halford called it primal or primitive.
Yeah.
I don't like using those terms, but what he was talking about is that very thing that still drives metal in all of that today. You cannot erase
I agree.
that. The fact that even when it comes to
I agree.
like screaming and growling and all that, we did that in church. Like I mean, all that stuff kind of like it has nothing to do with classical music. You
I
know?
agree, and I think that it's like it's I think it's white people trying to make themselves feel more comfortable with how much like black people like they were literally kept out of music. I think like white people are just still really grappling with how guilty they feel about like how black people were disrespected as musicians. I do think it's something that they'll never really like be able, because it like for you to talk about black people in the United States, you would have to talk about how music was literally stolen from them.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's been so much, and I'm glad that people like yourself, Sam, um, Ogun Prime, and even other cats like like are doing what we're doing in that sense, because it's almost like we're like, nope, we're not gonna have you got like it's basically this. Cats like to take credit for things that they didn't do. And I've seen it with rock, I've seen it with jazz, I've seen it with hip hop, man, and even gospel. It's just like, dude, no. So
I
this is the
agree.
time I think where we need to start really like, and especially I'm being specific more so as an original Black
Oh,
American,
nice.
need to really just start. I guess people use the term gatekeeping, but people think that we have no culture, and it's just like, dude, no, our culture's gone global with the very things that we've done,
Oh, agree.
musically, and you know.
I agree. Do you have any specific like examples or anything?
Oh, just all of the stuff that we've created, music wise. I mean, rock, jazz, hip hop, country, and even like a lot of modern folk music. I mean, Lead Belly is definitely an influence on that, you know?
So have you ever seen like full on music like being played like live before? It's pretty cool.
Fula music, like
Yeah,
Fulani?
yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some videos, but like, what do you have?
Usually I just watch like the ensembles like this from Senegal, like to just like get a sense of like how they worked as like a band like together, with like percussion. Um, and it like I'm really like seeing the parallels of like how we still do that, especially in terms of drum circles and like centered performances. You know.
That's awesome. No, that's really cool,
Yeah.
man. One thing I forgot to ask you, especially because you mentioned both names. First of all, do you still go by Nicole Colley? And I know you go by Nicole Noir as well. Is it still simultaneous, or just one is um like one is still how can I say this? One trumps more the other, or like or one is defunct, or like I have like 26 nicknames, so I mean, like, how do you like, what's the difference between the two? Or are they both personas, or just
Um, they're both personas for sure, and like usually people call me either of them. Like, and I don't really have a preference or whatever. That was mainly just because work wanted um me to have like specifically just a profile for like metal. So like that's mainly what you see on there. And then Noir is like metal, but like also just other stuff that isn't really under that subculture. Um, but in terms of like what people call me, like yeah, that's usually like either one of those or just like my given name. Yeah.
like what's the difference between the two?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, like, and I usually just like whatever people think is like cool. I'm just like, that's what's up, man.
That's cool, man. Shoot, there was one more question that I wanted to ask that's kicking me in the tail right now. Don't knock me out, man.
It's all
I
good.
know it's getting late
No,
there
like
too.
that's like I'm a night owl. Like I'm just really grateful to just talk as friends.
Man, no, I really appreciate it. Seriously, Um, oh, shoot. How can I do this to me? Um, as far as like just our place, especially like just even being on this land, as like, foundational or original Black Americans, what would you say? Oh, there's the question is coming up. How would you define, first of all, blackness in just blackness in general with the diaspora thing? I'm curious, and I mean, I have an idea, but I want you to actually you know like, I want to hear your definition.
If you've ever had the thought, wow, we are the first people, and like really felt that as a reality, yeah, you're part of the diaspora. Yeah, if you've ever had that like sense, like whoa, like double consciousness. Remember, like everyone's talked about that from like W.E.B. Du Bois to like Booker T to like Malcolm X. If you ever had like the thought, like I should be somewhere else, and you know where that somewhere else is, but you're here, yeah, you're part of the diaspora. Now, for people that are African, they only claim black so far as they left their home to become that, right? But like for me, I'm just like, I understand like you were black in terms of your skin tone, you know, but like it's kind of different for y'all, but you're still part of the African diaspora because so many African people no longer live there, right? Diaspora just means people that left or a scattering of folks, you know. So like for us here in the United States, like that's very much a lived thing. Like we are the first people that are considered black, right? That mainly applies to us, but it's also a global terminology. Yeah.
Yeah, I always think of it like kind of in the same way because I studied like J.A. Rogers and all that, and it gave me a really broad perspective to for us as well as like like just even non-black folks, and how like we're so global. I think of it. I think of people now, us specifically by ethnicity and race, we are black, and we've been. I think personally, I think we've been the champions of blackness and global blackness, even when it comes to people that are so-called negritos of Asia or the Andamanese, or like the Melanesians, and even a lot of the Aboriginal people of Australia. They're all black, and even though some people don't really go by that over there, like the so-called Kala, like in India, like the Dravidians and stuff.
Yeah, that's true too.
Like
That's also very true. That is very, very much true.
I think of them as black, but I totally like I agree with everything you're saying. But I think of just and I'll even cover some of these cats,
All right,
But I
so
think
how's that been going?
well, no, I covered probably one Aboriginal band, but I think like when it comes to us, like we definitely, are the champions of that. And it's not to put anyone down, but we've made it to where it's just like even Pan-Africanism has come from like a lot of the things that a lot of Black Americans started. It's not a better than you thing, as you're saying, but it's just like we've really it's almost like we're kind of in the belly of the beast and challenged a lot of that stuff, when it comes to people kind of going against it. And it's like, hey, anyone like us, we're going to stick up for, I mean, we stuck up for even people that weren't like us, but yeah,
Tell me about that. Like,
but
how did you realize like that you wanted to like just get to know people more, like in the diaspora?
Oh, I've always been funny because I'm shy, but I've always had an affinity for just people in general. And then when it came to our history, just knowing the origins, kind of like you, of where everything comes from culturally, as well as just how it transfers over to here. And even what we've made, yes, we have a culture for people that don't think that we do. We've made our own culture. We've had ethnogenesis as, foundational original Black Americans, freedmen. But I've always had an affinity for that and just our history no matter what. And it was people like J.A. Rogers that really kind of cultivated that. My dad's friend kind of hit me to him, earlier on, and I just, but I've always had an affinity, even when it came to, us being in comic books or music, Black History of Rock and Roll was born of that, so that's what it came from. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I'm probably gonna start doing like more of the root sessions. You remember I started doing like Lab for Brew, just like different like music samples and stuff. I kind of do that with the fashion videos. Forgot to talk about the diaspora apparel. That's on me. I forgot to bring up the fashion thing. But like Wodabe songs, especially like this one, is probably like the biggest tie I'd say to metal and like Negro spirituals. Have you listened to like Wodabe music before?
I've only heard very, very, very little when they do the festival, but
yeah, like
let me hear more of that.
Festival chant, but it sounds very metal, very grungy. And the chanting is the thing that I started like gravitating to the most. I'm pretty sure a lot of the metal like call and response and like layering vocals has to come at some point, like from the Wodabe.
Oh yeah,
because it's very, very powerful and it sounds very like what's the word? How would you describe it? What's the time signature? I think it is 1-2. I think it's 4-4.
It sounds 4-4
rhythmic, and like that's what like I run into like people to like get a sense for is like a lot of this music is like polyrhythmic. So again, house music. People have a hard time attributing that to black people and Africanness. It's like no, like, you can definitely see the blueprint for it, in
Yeah.
like Central West Africa and African music. What do you think?
It's cool. The drums are not coming in is good on my end because it's probably just my phone. But I dig what I'm hearing like sonically. What's up,
You can probably hear the
everybody
drums
that's
now.
new? Yeah, I could hear it.
Now you and I already like that's familiar tones to us because we're like, oh, that's church. Like that that sounds
Yep.
like African
And
American
it's
church,
funny.
but that's the truth, right?
Yeah.
The problem with people like Scott Ian is that they have a hard time taking black people out of church and seeing them as
Yep.
legitimate musicians, right? Black Sabbath did not have that problem, right? Black Sabbath is like Led Zeppelin, even if they have a weird relationship with blackness, they still understand blues as like the origin, like point
Yep.
for their sound, right? So like a lot of people still don't fuck with like Black Sabbath for their Black Lives Matter shirt, right? Like, and they didn't fuck with them from the beginning because they sounded like black musicians, right? I do think it was around the point that like Rob Halford and like Judas Priest came out that they were a little more comfortable with like blackness, but it still wasn't being respected in the same way. And usually, all of the older like beginning like metal bands that had black members, a lot of people don't remember that they were there. Um, and like we've been talking about that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. And yeah, actually, what's up, Mark? We see Mark. I interviewed Mark
Hey,
last year.
how's it
Mark
going?
Edwards, who played with Cecil Taylor and a lot of other
Oh,
cats. David S. Ware,
nice.
you
Very
know.
cool.
Played with Weasel Walter of Flying Lutenbachers as well
Oh
in a
my god,
band.
that is so cool, man.
Yeah,
Oh my
Mark's
god.
amazing. But yeah, no, it's yeah, I think just people have they don't really know much about they have this perception of what black people and black culture is to the point where they've basically like just bathed in it. And anything that you tell them, it's just like that's why I'm like, okay, I'm putting this out. Whoever wants to see it, mostly, and what I do mostly is for us. Anyone else want to get in on it? That's cool. I'm not, like I'm not like tripping on anyone, but don't freaking come at me saying like all this revisionist stuff because you're seriously either going to get the total ignore from me or you're going to basically get an onslaught of the truth that you don't want to hear. So, and it's the same thing I see with you. um I see on your Rock the Diaspora thing, it seems like you do a lot of history stuff still. That's what really stands
Yeah.
out. It's very
Yeah,
specific,
that
even
was the
more so.
main that was the main point because like for me like like and Brew like we were always getting a lot of shit even though like for some reason we're doing like artist spotlights. I'm like, okay, we should probably talk about the history of like how these musicians, like how did Tina Turner become a blues musician is probably important history to know, right? How did Jimi Hendrix go from being like that kid that we saw in the Doo-Wop video to becoming like a rock guitarist? Like all of these things are like black history. It's just I think people are just kind of used to being like, okay, spotlight, and then like moving on. Yeah. But like for me, I was just like, well, like we should be paying more attention to it without just this moving on. And I'm glad that there is like more of an attention span. I would say people weren't paying attention before in like the older Brew era and like the 2010s, but I'd say that they just didn't know. They just were not aware. So now you're seeing a lot of people like kind of like avidly looking for this information and doing spotlights on this stuff on TikTok. It's because I think they're trying to catch up.
Yeah, but it's people like you, and I'd like to think of myself in it, but I love what you and Sam have done. You guys are like archivists. You guys are musicologists. You guys are like ethnomusicologists, and specifically Black rock ethnomusicologists. Even though I know you guys know a lot of stuff, I love the work that you guys do. It's all different from all of our angles and stuff, and we need more of it. And I'm just glad that Like, I feel like so overwhelmed interviewing you because I really admire what you've done.
Yeah.
And don't ever think that it's gone unsung, because seriously, dude, like for me, I'm glad that I'm not alone in doing this. You know, I don't think I'm anyone special, but I just feel like it's so cool to have our new Black rock media. And I've talked to Sam about this when it comes to this subject that people think that we haven't had anything to do with since like the 60s. And that's not true. And that's one of the reasons that I especially, you know, I put out like all kinds of different cats from decades, but especially the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, because people think that we weren't involved. And as you can see, that's what we do. But
Absolutely that. Yeah, I feel horrible for so many of those folks who were just like waiting to be paid attention to. It's so sad. It's so sad. Like that's honestly like why I started doing it. Before Brew even, because like I just saw like how sad my grandma was. Like, it seemed like she thought she was the only one. You know, I was like, that's really a shame. You know, because like there's a whole world of like people out here that listen to this music, and she still felt like in her old age that like she was like a loner, and I was like, well, that's not the case. So
that's cool. Your grandma was rocking too. That's awesome.
she really liked that stuff. I just think she felt ashamed. I think that she felt like she couldn't share that with people. Yeah. So like a lot of those records she hid from like John Lee Hooker and like Mother's Finest and stuff because she didn't want people to know. Yeah.
Man, what a trip. So with that, winding down, I'm gonna ask you like, what are you up to lately? What's the future hold, and just what do you want us to look out for?
Oh, man, just like keep doing y'all. Honestly, like we're gonna be doing more spotlights on artists. We finally started our series, Afrofuturism Black to the Future. We put out our first edition of that this week, with some artists you might know and then might not know. Aaliyah was in the video, Missy Elliott was in the video, Octavia Butler, if you know her, from Afrofuturism, and Sun Ra as well. So we're going to be doing more stuff like that. And then we'll have individual posts for like Afrofuturist artists that we think are cool, like TV on the radio.
That's rad.
And then we have like some fashion pieces. I'm like trying to make some of this stuff tonight. And then some of it's already done like this. So that people like, you know, think that African fashion is like cool and also something that they can get into.
What about those shirts that you had like various artists written on? Like what you still promoting those?
So like so like that's just like for free shirts, because a lot of the band, like some of the bands are cool with it, and then some of them like I'm like, okay, like you're a trademark, you know, I can't just like take your shirt and sell it. And they're like, we like what you're doing, but like you'd have to officially ask for our permission from the creative estate, right?
Wait, but even the ones that you had with all the names, like you had Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Jimi Hendrix.
Like like Prince, for example, like Prince is gone, but he's still in the state. So if I had Prince's name on it, even if like Prince's team was cool with it, if I make money off of it, then I'd have to give them whatever profits partially that I make from it. Why? Because they're a trademark name. And all of them are, you know, Tina Turner, like same. Yeah.
Sheesh, I had no idea.
Mm-hmm. So like when you start getting into fashion and like becoming a business, you realize a lot of these figures that we admire and that make music, like they are their own estate, you know, like they are their own kind of like business. So you have to be respectful and you have to be very aware. But then there's artists like Bam Bam, you know, like Tina Bell from Bam Bam, where like there's no copyright on that, right? So like they've given me permission to put her on the shirt. Yeah.
Yeah, shouts to Scotty Buttocks, man. He
still needs a shirt. Yeah, I need to get him one. The problem was like I just been moving back and forth, and like my site was kind of having some issues for a minute, but I need to get him a shirt because he wanted a Bam Bam one. Tina Bell was the shit. She was too cool.
And dude, I found out about her and through our sisters in Brazil, you know, Tanya and Anna. Shouts to those girls, you know, like. It's so cool being a part of these circles. I forgot to mention them earlier too, because they've been doing that good work too, you know.
Wonderful ladies, wonderful ladies.
Yeah, man. Well, with that, give your social media and how could we, you know, I don't care if you even give cash apps. Do that. I was laughing. The homegirl Safra, who I interviewed a week ago, I'm like, no, yes, it's okay to give your cash app. I want brothers and
Oh,
sisters to be
Safra.
down to.
Yeah, Black Paper's not playing anymore, right?
Huh?
From Black
Oh yeah,
Paper.
they broke up
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
she told
Safra's
me
dope
about that.
though. Safra's really cool.
I can see you guys working together, especially because both of you guys are kind of into some pretty cool like avant-garde
I
stuff,
just
as
like I
well.
need to get back in touch with them through Rock the Diaspora, but like when we were rolling with Rue, oh man, like we were like that. So yeah. In terms of my socials, fam, like you can always find me here, like Rock the Diaspora, and then like my personal tags are on there. But my team is also on the bio too. So if you want to know what the team is up to, that's Jay, that's Kim, that's Ali, and that's also Paul from Detroit. You're welcome to find them there too. And then rockthediaspora.org is pretty much like from there where you can like spread out and explore our own like little Afroverse is what I call it because we have our own like little like galaxy going on.
Yeah, man. And by the way, shouts for putting me in that video.
Yeah, for
you
sure,
know,
dude.
I was like, oh, I was all like, and especially like people don't know about like a lot of Afro-Indigenous roots that we have here, or just, you know, those who are classified as black, that were also native. On my mom's side, I got some of those roots, like
Right, right.
Seminole Nation roots. But of course,
On.
you know, I'm typical Black American stuff. We have African and indigenous from this land, whether they're red or black, and unfortunately some European stuff. But yeah,
You
you
can't really
know,
help it, you can't really help it being from the States, but like I think that's really, it's just really important, especially as a fellow Afro Indigenous person to like, just like, not be ashamed, just not be ashamed. Yeah.
no, not at all, man. I dig it. I mean, heck, um, I've said this a few times, but like, Little Richard is like my mom's my grandma's cousin actually,
Yeah.
and he talks about like the native roots in our fam and stuff. I never met him. But some of my uncles have,
So cool,
So that
dude.
was interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah, yeah, like that's really, I think that's just really interesting, and I'm always supportive. Yeah, dude.
Yeah, man.
Like,
Well,
what about you, man? Like, what have you been? What do you want to share before you get going?
oh man, it's not about me, man. But in case, I'm just been working. I'm gonna hopefully be in a few months finishing my recording project. I've never
Oh,
really put out my own music officially. I mean, stuff that
really?
you can find online, but I really want to have a hard copy of like, people know me just for playing bass in bands, and that's cool. That's mostly what people know me for, but they don't really know me as a composer, even though I've done things. Even within Javelina, I've had a few pieces that I've composed and put out there. It's just we never played them live, or most people don't really know about that. So now it's mostly like I'm trying to, aside from the stuff that I have on like Bandcamp and all that, really put something out there. And then of course, Sound Army. I'm still involved with our collective here out here with my students and everyone that belongs to that collective. With the games and stuff that I throw and working
Oh,
with kids and all
I
that.
love
So
that.
that's pretty cool.
So yeah, that's wonderful, Orlando. That's so
Yeah.
cool, man.
And connecting with brothers and sisters that are doing the same thing that we're doing. And shouts to Afro Goth Aesthetic. Thank you. Um,
Yes.
um, you know,
Yeah, they're great.
um,
Yeah, shout out to them. They're really nice folks. I really like look forward to seeing what they're doing and working with them.
yeah, man. They told me that like they were hip to you, and I'm like, okay, man. Yeah, all right. That's dope.
Yeah, I've been
That's
with
dope. That's
I've been
that's
rolling with
what's
them
up.
for a minute. I just think they're a little shy because like I don't think people really supported them for a long time. Yeah. Um, and I think just in general, it's like being an Afro goth is it's very kind of new to people, to other people. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and it's cool now that we have, you know, that's the thing I like about these online things. It's because you could come together a lot easier than it was when I was younger.
Yeah.
Like you're lucky to see any of us at any shows, and lucky if any of us acknowledge, because some cats are like, okay, you're just talking to me because I'm black, kind of that attitude. And it's like, all right, I'll leave you alone.
Oh man, I feel that 100%. You're right. You're right, Orlando. You're not wrong. That's real. That's real.
but
It's yeah. You're right.
but I'm still open. to talk to cats no matter what. And I always, even in my collective, we're a multi-ethnic, multiracial, men and women, all kinds of different people in our collective. And a lot of these kids I've seen grow up, and it's just so cool because a lot of them there's punks, there's goths, there's metalheads, there's people in the hip hop. And our thing was no genres, all scenes, no scenes. Basically saying we're not beholden to any scene or any genre because of the arrogance of all of it, but we like all of it, all both,
Right on.
So yeah.
That's really sweet.
So check it out. I want to get a word of advice. I know it's getting late. I got a sister up,
It's all good. But what you want to say, buddy?
Oh no, I want you to give some words of wisdom because I know you have that,
Man. I guess in times of turmoil like this, just know like sometimes you are your own steering wheel, and like sometimes the knowledge, the coordinates, like Sun Ra says, come from elsewhere, and like I think the mystery and the appeal for me with Sun Ra is like, where did the knowledge come from? And like that still like creeps me out, to be honest, because I got my own theories as to like how close to space Sun Ra got, dude. I don't know, but like just be open to the unknown, man. Because like I think for Black people we fear that. For me as an Afro-Goth, I'm like, the unknown is something for you to be like excited about, like things are very like up in the air, but that also means plenty of new possibilities.
That's a trip. It reminds me of like, and I know we've talked about like Orthodox faith, but a lot of the monks and stuff, when I was reading the Desert Fathers, they kind of had that perspective where it's just like you're facing the arcane, and whatever comes your way, you're just, you're facing it in the face of the most, with the guise of the most